Australians could be paying more in their mortgages within days after the biggest jump in consumer prices in 2 decades. As wages struggle to keep pace, surging petrol and building costs have combined to push inflation to 5.1%.
The result raises the prospect interest rates could be lifted from the record low 0.1% as early as Tuesday. It's meant housing affordability has been thrust back onto the centre stage in the election campaign, with a new report out today also suggesting Australia's rental market is virtually out of reach for low-income households. Lots to talk about, so let's bring in political reporters Henry Bello with the Prime Minister's campaign in Cairns and Noor Haider, who's with Labor in Sydney. Good morning to both of you. Henry, no doubt the economy is going to dominate again today.
Yeah, this is going to be the big political story of the day, and it could also be the big political story of the election campaign. The Prime Minister has a real headache here because the cost of living index has increased to the highest level in 2 decades. And Lisa, what that means is that the Reserve Bank is expected to increase interest rates, and it could happen as soon as next Tuesday in the middle of an election campaign. So yes, that will increase pressure on households with mortgage, but also pressure on a government that's been campaigning on the cost of living. There is precedent for this happening in election campaigns. The last time it happened was in 2007 when John Howard was seeking re-election. When rates went up, he apologised to voters, but 2 weeks later he lost the election. Now, Scott Morrison knows that if rates go up next week, then voters are likely to punish him. So he's keen to point out that many of the factors at play here are beyond his control. He's pointing to international petrol prices. He's talking about freight delays, disruption to supply chains during the pandemic. He's also trying to point out that inflation is higher in some countries. Yesterday he was talking about New Zealand, but really this all depends on whether voters also make that distinction or whether they look at their bills and they blame a government that's been talking about trying to ease this. This morning the Coalition's campaign spokeswoman Jane Hume says that Australia isn't the only government dealing with this issue.
It's also happened under the government of the US, under Joe Biden, under Boris Johnson in the UK, and under Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. This is a global phenomenon in higher inflation rates, which will be fed into normalising our interest rates again. So we knew that this was going to happen at some stage.
And there's more concern from welfare groups about what's going on with the economy.
Yeah, and particularly on housing affordability. It's not just those with mortgages who are likely to feel the pinch. Anglicare has a report out today that has a pretty staggering figure. It says that just 1 in 4 private rental properties in Australia are affordable for those on the minimum wage. And then when it comes to those on welfare payments, it's none. Now, they're joining with a number of other welfare groups in calling for the Commonwealth rental assistance to be doubled and for it to be actually indexed to what the average rental price is in a particular area where people are living in Australia, instead of being indexed to inflation. It's just another sign that housing affordability is a real issue, not just people with mortgages, but also those renting across the country.
Thanks, Henry. And you're with the Labor camp. They must be really wondering how this will play into this campaign. They've certainly been quick to jump on the government over its handling of the economy.
Yeah, absolutely, Lisa. These figures effectively seal the case for an imminent interest rate rise, which is bad news for Australian households, but politically speaking has come at a good time for Labor. The Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers has accused Scott Morrison of presiding over a triple whammy of poor economic figures, not only the rising cost of living, but stagnant wages, and as economists are forecasting an expected interest rate rise. Now, he says that Australians are being smashed by the rising cost of living and has accused the Coalition of failing to act. As we heard there from Henry Bello, the Coalition's argument is that largely it's international factors that are driving these higher inflation rates, but the Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers says that that's not the full picture. Take a listen.
These inflationary pressures and, most importantly, falling real wages were actually a feature of the economy even before some of this international turbulence. We've had almost a decade now of stagnant wages growth, and that's meant falling real wages in recent times because we've got this diabolical triple whammy on Scott Morrison's watch, which is cost of living going through the roof, real wages going backwards, and now the prospect of interest rate rises very soon.
And that's the Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers speaking there. Yesterday, Labor timed the release of some new economic policies to coincide with the release of those inflation figures. Labor is saying that it will slash spending on consultants. If it's elected, it'll also conduct a government-wide audit to see where it might be able to find savings. And finally, it says that it will raise some $2 billion over 4 years by tightening legal loopholes that see big companies shift their profits overseas. That announcement was made without the Labor leader Anthony Albanese being present. He is still in COVID isolation, but he's expected to be back out on the campaign trail tomorrow.